And this one is another vindication of the vilified kind of thing that I wanted to just revisit for the sake of remembering, because the news cycles in this country move so fast that most of the time I feel like people don't even remember stuff that happened a year ago or 6 months ago even. This is about a woman who resigned from the State Department over the war in Gaza. And it was covered on Democracy Now! A few months ago. But when I went looking for this clip, I found a bunch more. And I only pulled the 3 biggest ones, but there's literally, just Google State Department resignation Gaza, and you'll find all kinds of shit. But this was the first one. And this was the first woman who is a Jewish woman. And her name is Lily Greenberg Call. Democracy Now! I have to say too, I definitely fell away from them a little bit when they kind of bought the whole Russiagate thing, but they are one of the better sources. I definitely think they do a much better job, especially on the Israel thing, than any of the mainstream news outlets do.
On May 15th, Lily Greenberg Call, a special assistant to the chief of staff at the Department of the Interior and a political appointee of President Biden, resigned from her position in protest of the administration's policies in Gaza. In doing so, she became the first known Jewish appointee to resign from the Biden administration over Gaza. In a 4-page letter of resignation she released publicly, Greenberg Call wrote, quote, "I can no longer in good conscience continue to represent this administration amidst President Biden's disastrous continued support for Israel's genocide in Gaza," unquote. Lily Greenberg Call chose May 15th as the date of her resignation because it marked the anniversary of the Nakba, Arabic for catastrophe, when up to 900,000 Palestinians were driven from their homes and displaced in 1948 during the founding of Israel. In her resignation letter, she wrote, quote, "Nakba and Shoah, the Hebrew word for Holocaust, mean the same thing, catastrophe. I reject the premise that one people's salvation must come at another's destruction. I'm committed to creating a world where this does not happen, and this cannot be done from within the Biden administration," she wrote. Lily Greenberg Call joins us today in our New York studio. Lily, welcome to Democracy Now! Thanks so much for joining us. If you can talk about the significance of the date you chose and why you have decided to resign.
Thanks for having me, Amy. So as I said in my resignation letter, Nakba and Shoah mean the same thing. I was raised with a fairy tale about the Nakba. The Nakba was something that I was not really told about, and if anything, it was minimized and trivialized. Was raised with this idea that Israel was a land without a people for a people without a land. And so if there's no Palestinian society, if there's nothing to be destroyed, then there's nothing to mourn. So I felt as a Jewish person that it was particularly important for me to acknowledge the significance of the Nakba, and the Nakba that has never really ended, that continues to this day.
I just want to say too, Jewish people have been the most vocal opponents of this, and credit where credit is due. My fellow Jewish friends who have spoken out about this, because your voices are the most important. I mean, this woman saying this is just, it's massive. She works for the State Department.
And, as I mentioned, there's something devastating about the parallels between, the same word, Nakba and Shoah, and the idea that what many Jews see as our salvation in the formation of the State of Israel came at the expense of Palestinian freedom. And so I want us to reject that premise, the idea that Jewish safety and Palestinian freedom are at odds with each other, and understand that any system that requires that, requires the oppression of one people for another, is inherently unsafe.
I don't know if unsafe is the word I would use, but very well said. So let's go to resignation number 2 here. And this is a woman named Hala Rharrit. Forgive me if I'm saying that incorrectly, but another State Department employee who resigned over the Gaza war.
Hala Rharrit is an 18-year career diplomat who
Hala Rharrit.
recently resigned from the State Department. She's the third State Department employee, but the first Foreign Service officer to do so. Hala Rharrit served as the Arabic language spokesperson for the State Department in the region. She joins us now in her first TV interview since her resignation. Hala Rharrit, welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you so much, Amy. It's an honor to be with you.
Can you start off by talking about why you have publicly resigned?
Absolutely. Honestly, I wasn't intending to publicly resign. I was intending to resign. My profile at the Dubai Media Hub, my last assignment, was quite high profile. My role was to speak to Arab media about American policy. So it inevitably made the news when I did resign. It first made the news, I believe, here in the region and the United States. But the reason why I resigned is really because I could no longer be a part of the State Department and promote this policy. It's an inhumane policy. It's a failed policy that is helping neither Palestinians, neither Israelis. And I want to stress that point, that it's not strictly the horrific mass killings that we have all been watching over the course of over 200 days, the targeting of journalists, of healthcare workers, over 14,000 children massacred. But it's also not keeping Israelis any safer. The hostages.
I just want to pause there for a second, because that honestly is the argument that I have been making continually since the Iraq War. Us dissidents, we don't hate America. We're not working for Putin. We're not working for Hamas or any of the dumb, lunk-headed bullshit that people say. We're critics of our country because we see that this causes problems for us. And what she's pointing out here is that this whole thing that's happening, it's not good for Israel. It's making Israel unsafe, you know? So if you care about Israel, you should be against this. And I also feel like the Ukraine thing was kind of a test run for how much Americans are willing to accept, because none of us voted for this. Even the dumb fucks who got duped into voting for Biden didn't vote for war in Gaza and war in Ukraine. You know, none of them voted for that, even though they were dumb enough to be duped into voting for Biden, which I'm so happy I did not vote for Biden in the last election cycle. But let me let her finish up, because this third State Department resignation is the best one of all three.
Are still in Gaza. Israelis know that there's going to be a vicious cycle of violence after so many have been killed in Gaza. This does not help anyone. And the militaristic policy is not the solution. As a diplomat,
as Americans, we are so spoiled because we live in a safe environment while our country is creating chaos everywhere else. We just haven't been hit yet, thankfully, you know, because it's not like we're in a good place militarily. Jesus.
As someone that believes in diplomacy, in the power of diplomacy, I did everything I could from within to try to explain this on a daily basis, through reports, through cables. Nothing was working until finally I made the decision that I could no longer be part of the system.
What do you feel President Biden and your boss at the State Department, Secretary of State Tony Blinken, could do right now?
Wait a minute. Did she just say Secretary of State Tony Blinken? Keep on bombing lots of people. It was an opportunity. I took it.
They need to abide by national, domestic law and international law. We have systems in place within the State Department to ensure situations like this don't happen. We are not authorized to send military equipment, weapons to countries that commit human rights abuses. ICJ has determined plausible genocide, yet we are still sending billions upon billions of not just defensive weaponry, but offensive weaponry. It is tantamount to a violation of domestic law.
But vote for Kamala Harris if you want that to stop. The person who's
I want to talk to you.
Many diplomats know it. Many diplomats are scared to say it. It's a violation of international law, what we've been seeing happening in Gaza. And we cannot make exceptions for our allies. It does not help our allies to make exceptions. Because again, all that this is doing is creating a vicious cycle of violence, and it has clearly failed. Its objectives, it has failed. The hostages are still not back with their families where they belong. The situation in
The idea that Netanyahu ever cared about the hostages is hilarious on its face.
Gaza remains intensely unstable. People continue to suffer on a daily basis. It's time for President Biden and Secretary Blinken to realize that this militaristic approach has been a failure, and they need to stop. They need to abide by US law, and that doing so will create a lot of leverage. If we are able to condition military aid, we will be able to pressure Israel. We will also be able to work with our Arab allies to pressure Hamas to have real substantive change on the ground. That's what's necessary at this time, not more arms.
And this is what people have been saying from day one. From day one. So let's get into this last State Department resignation here. And I think of all the people who resigned, she kind of has the most clear and concise statements and kind of rationale behind what she thinks should happen. So check this out.
By viewers like you. Please support our work. I'm Amy Goodman, Administration Support for the War, Refugees and Migration, which is the State Department's chief humanitarian office and features heavily in internal policy discussions over Gaza. This week, she sent an email to staff explaining her disagreements with a recently published State Department report that she worked on, but which concluded that Israel was not obstructing U.S. humanitarian assistance to Gaza. That report was used by the Biden administration to justify continuing to send more than $1 billion of weapons to Israel. Stacy Gilbert resigned after working at the State Department for over 20 years, joining us now from Baltimore, Maryland.
That's count them, two career State Department officials, 20 years resigning over this. And again, who voted for this? When you voted for Biden, did you vote for war in Gaza and Ukraine and record inflation and complete garbage? So listen to this, because this woman here lays out how goddamn corrupt the current administration is. Sorry.
Explain your final decision to resign.
Thanks for having me. I have... About myself, I've worked for the State Department for a while, and it's not just working in the State Department. I've worked in humanitarian issues, refugee crises, basically most every refugee and humanitarian crisis involving conflict in that time. So Kosovo, Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan. My role in all of this specifically was supporting our team that oversees assistance to Gaza and the Middle East, but specifically working on this report. We were directed in early February by the White House to come up with a report that assesses different countries based on two things primarily. One is their adherence to, as Alex mentioned, international humanitarian law, which is the law that says there are wars, but there are rules in war. There's rules about the kind of weapons you can use, about making the distinction between civilians and combatants. And basically, it's a body of laws that says even in war, there are ways that you have to mitigate the consequences.
So just to stop here for a second, if you notice, the common thread between all these resignees is a refusal of the current administration to obey international law. And the whole argument for what they're doing to the Palestinians is we're better than that. We're better than those terrorists. Are we? No, we're not. Not at all. It's insane. But listen to the theme that this woman goes through is exactly what's wrong with America as a whole. Because what she describes here is a person on the ground level who's doing their job correctly, and a person on the top level superseding that and saying, no, we'll fix this. You're off this one now. We got it. Because that's what happens in the news media. You have a reporter that does a really great job that exposes the administration, and then you have an editor that takes that and rearranges the wording and makes it basically a non-story. And that's exactly what happens here. Listen to this woman.
For civilians and soldiers. And we adhere to that. Israel adheres to it. It is international law. So this report was looking at adherence to that body of law, as well as whether countries allow humanitarian assistance. There were several countries we were assessing, but the one, unsurprisingly, that generated the most debate was Israel. I was working on this report with many others. There were a handful of us who were very, very engaged in every sentence of that. But at some point, we were removed from that report, and it was moved up to a higher level to be written and edited and cleared. So even though I had worked on this pretty heavily since this directive from the White House came out in early February, I did not know what was in the report until it came out. That said, I was actually hopeful.
She was hopeful
that it would be a honest report, because earlier that week, the White House had made an announcement that it was going to pause the 2,000-pound bombs that
I want to talk to you.
have really caused disproportionate destruction in Gaza. So they had announced a pause on that. And I was actually pretty hopeful that maybe this report was going to be honest. So when the report came out on May 10th, late in the day, I read it. And I had to reread it because I couldn't believe what it said. It said very clearly, it actually, so on those 2 points, I was surprised on the point about Israel's adherence to international humanitarian law. For the first time I'm aware of, we admitted in very, very weak terms, but we admitted that Israel is likely using U.S. weapons in violation of international humanitarian law. I was surprised. That was a step forward in admitting that. I was shocked, however, that it also went on to say that it is our assessment that Israel is not blocking humanitarian assistance. That is not the view of subject matter experts at the State Department, at USAID, nor among the humanitarian community, and that was known. That was absolutely known to the administration.
Anti-Semite right here. You know, the ADL would definitely call this woman an anti-Semite. Listen to her.
ADL is played out. Nobody knows who the ADL are. Stop giving them attention. Nobody cares about the ADL.
Administration for a very long time, not just within the government, but having received reports and letters from organizations on the ground in Gaza, organizations the U.S. government funds, credible organizations saying Israel is blocking humanitarian assistance. And that's not to say that Israel is the only problem in this. There are certainly, it's a conflict, it's difficult. But these are professional organizations with expertise, local knowledge. They know how to work in conflicts. They know how to do the negotiations, to get the assistance to where it needs to be. They know how to do it. The issue is they are not being allowed to. And it's a range of issues. It's not just blocking trucks from going in, because we see over the course of this conflict, sometimes trucks go in, sometimes they're delayed, sometimes assistance goes in, but then it's ratcheted back. But we're seeing consistently through this a pattern of obstruction that the aid that prevents these organizations from doing their work and delivering this assistance to the people who need it.
I didn't put this clip in, but maybe I'll have to plug it in post. But do you remember when they killed the World Central Kitchen workers? They literally put a bomb right through the roof of their truck that said World Central Kitchen on top of it, because Hamas or something, you know? So I think the title of this segment can just be 3 anti-Semites resign from the State Department, maybe, you know? That could be a working title for this particular segment, because these are 3 tenured State Department officials who have resigned over the corruption in the current situation in Gaza. And villains, all of them.
I want to talk to you. Okay, I can first.
What? They want to know now.
We're there after 2.